Good morning, everybody, and welcome in for another edition of the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. I'm Zach Farmer. That's Thomas Dunn, and we've got a bunch to get into. We've got five WCC games today. There are no random non-conference games this week, so we will not be going over the random of those. We'll recap a bit about what happened on Wednesday. No Thursday games. We were playing on Wednesday this past week, so we'll get into that. Theo Lawson from the Spokane Review, he will be joining us to talk about the Zags and Dons matchup tonight. Big one up at the Kennel. The last time that the Dons will be up there as a member of the W's, or with that being a WCC game, and it's the 100th time the two teams have met. So kind of a little bit of a landmark there, even though obviously this has been a largely one-sided affair in favor of the Zags. So before we get started, be sure to hit the subscribe button on YouTube, Spotify, Twitch, wherever you are listening to the podcast. And we're going to get started with the recaps. And we're going to start with St. Mary's having that rebound and getting right against Oregon State, because this was something we were curious about what St. Mary's was going to look like one night or a few nights after playing Santa Clara and losing that game down at the Levy Center. And well, it kind of went, I think, about as the way, at least in the finality, like it was St. Mary's by 30, 81-51. The end result was probably about what was to be expected. But the way it got there was maybe more the story, because the St. Mary's came out a little bit slow. The offense wasn't really humming all that well early on. But the defense finally was able to clamp down, and the offense took off. They took advantage of an Oregon State team that, well, just does not play well away from Gill Coliseum. And I mean, and then you look at what they were able to do. They hold Oregon State to 28% from the floor. Josh Dent, double, 16 points, 11 assists. This looked a little bit more just like a kind of business as usual St. Mary's outing against an Oregon State team that is still trying to find itself in WCC play.
Yeah, I think eventually the Gales just did what they had to do more than anything. I think those first 10 minutes or so were kind of touch and go, maybe the first 15 minutes if you wanted to reach that far ahead. But then once kind of the last few minutes of the half drug out, then things were humming for the Gales kind of the rest of the way and going forward. And I think it's a good response overall, considering, like you mentioned, Oregon State's, they're just not a great team this season, especially on the road. We know what they're like year in, year out. So good for St. Mary's to kind of get back on the mend in terms of that, so to speak. And they didn't even really need like star-studded huge nights. I know you mentioned what Josh Dent did. I think the 11 assists to only those 2 turnovers stands out more than anything, and probably a good rebound for him considering what happened at Santa Clara. Paulus Morauskas, I think you felt him a lot more, and that's not to say that it was his fault against Santa Clara, but just in general, the flow of the offense ran through him a lot more compared to the game down at the Levy Center, especially only in 26 minutes. And, I think the essential question going forward is, what are you going to get from Mikey Lewis? I think that's a make or break for the length to which St. Mary's can go this season. And, was 1 of 6 from 3. You're just kind of waiting to see, can he kind of put it back together on a consistent basis? And maybe that foot thing is a detriment the rest of the season. Maybe we don't know. But at least for me, that's one question that wasn't necessarily answered in this Oregon State game. But as far as what they need to do against the Beavers, they did that and then some in terms of the response.
Yeah, and the one thing I think I'm like bring up Mikey Lewis, it's like, it's not to say that it's going to all completely rest on his shoulders, but they are also St. Mary's is a week away from their return to Spokane, which will be their last WCC appearance at the Kennel. And he had a big night. It was a big part of their win up in Spokane a year ago. So we will see if he can have a couple more good games before they get to the Kennel. They do have Portland today up at Child Center. So that is an opportunity, obviously, for St. Mary's to really kind of like make sure that they're tightening up a lot of what has been kind of ailing them the last couple of weeks. And maybe the other thing I've just kind of noticed from that game, and we've seen it the last few games, is that we're seeing more of Tony Duckett and we're seeing more of Montez Uzenis. Both of those guys coming off the bench for St. Mary's and are starting to show a little bit more and more about what their value is. Uzenis had 6 points, 4 rebounds. Duckett had 5 points off the bench in that one against Oregon State. 13 minutes for Uzenis, 10 for Tony Duckett. But we also saw them both make appearances in the Santa Clara game. So these two are also starting, I think, going to be a little bit more visible in the games coming up. And again, like kind of like making sure that they are right and getting a little bit more of a run before they see Gonzaga is probably a good thing, just so that they have some level of backup in case things do they need a little bit of extra help at the kennel.
I think, at least to me, though, they were put in for two different reasons. I think Randy Bennett was very matter of fact after the San Francisco game that, Paulus is being asked to do a lot. So to have Montes come in and give him like 4 minutes of a breather, like that's very valuable. So I think Montes is more of a function of just trying to make sure that Paulus doesn't run out of gas over the course of this conference slate. And I think so far he's doing a great job of just doing a little bit of everything, pretty much the way I view it. And it's just my perspective only. It's like anything that Montes gives you is gravy, considering that you have Paulus coming back in the game. To me, Tony Duckett getting back in the rotation was more of a by necessity, given what was happening, because the offense was just horrible at the Levy Center. There's just really no bones about it. And Randy Bennett's like, all right, well, I know a guy who can shoot the ball. I've seen him when trying to scout him, and I've seen him at practice. So let's put in Tony Duckett and see what happens. And he does well against the Broncos relative to what a bunch of the other Gales did. And then he comes back and you're like, you know what, let's just give him a little bit more runway. So for me, I think the functions are a little different from the way Uzenis and Duckett got into the rotation. I don't know. I'm intrigued to see if Duckett stays in the rotation more than anything. I'm not 100% convinced that, like, for example, you mentioned the game at the Kennel, unless St. Mary's is just dying for offense, I'm not 100% convinced that he gets in the game. But we'll see. I can't sit here and say I'm the be all and end all with all the predictions and analysis I've ever made in my life.
All right, but St. Mary's with a little bit of an easier one today. They will be taking on Portland at the Chiles Center. So this one should be an opportunity for St. Mary's to kind of start to steer things in the right direction. Oregon State does have a bye today, so they will have a little bit of rest before they play next week. And so we're going to be joined in a few minutes by Theo Lawson from the Spokane Review. So we'll get into, well, what is the game of the night? And that's going to be San Francisco taking on Gonzaga at the Kennel. And thinking about this matchup, this has been obviously very one-sided. The Zags have won 33 straight. They haven't lost USF since 2012. Even kind of the crazier stat is that the Dons have not won in Spokane since 1989. It's been quite a while since they've been able to get a win up there. And I think the biggest question going into this one is, well, Graham Ike, yes, no, because that unlike maybe a couple of the last few games that Gonzaga's had, whether that be Seattle U, Pepperdine, you think the teams that that they're going to beat regardless of basically like Ike or Huff's attendance. This is a game now, it might matter, because if you don't have those two bigs, this is a USF team that probably matches up a lot better with Gonzaga now that they are going to be running a little bit smaller. You think about Tyrone Riley, David Fuchs, like Guillermo Diaz-Graham had a good game the other night. This might be far more interesting, and it could hinge on whether Ike plays or not.
Yeah, in this one, I think the Dons are a team that can, I think, give Gonzaga a lot more pain if Graham Ike doesn't play. And I'd say that from the perspective of David Fuchs isn't necessarily a strictly back to the basket center. He's someone who works on the perimeter a lot. Someone who, especially if you think of the way that Nikola Jokic kind of leverages himself for the Nuggets, like he's going to try and feed backdoor cuts a lot, and that's kind of the way Fuchs operates at the top of the key quite a bit, and trying to free up the USF guards and forwards going down the lane, going down the baseline, whatever that may be. So I think whereas Gonzaga like dictated the terms against Seattle U and kind of forced them to get out of it just from the way they operate their big men, I think USF provides a little bit of a different challenge in that regard. Guillermo Diaz-Graham's a perimeter guy. Barry Wong's a perimeter guy. And like I just mentioned with Fuchs, he kind of just dabbles in a little bit of everything. I think it'd be a little bit of a different challenge, but I texted you about this, and the betting line is still 17.5. So that kind of leads me to think that Ike is playing. have a feeling this is one of the first games where it's like, I don't know that you can get away with that against San Francisco. And I know that the Dons have not been what we've predicted them to be entering this season, but nevertheless, they still got very capable players, as we've seen. So that's where I kind of view this point. I think Graham Ike is going to play, and then we'll see. We'll get Theo Lawson here in a minute or so about whether he actually is trending in that direction. But at least for me, I think USF, that it kind of does hinge on Tyrone Riley. Zags have good personnel to kind of take him down, because I think Ryan Beasley will probably have a good game.
I think that one of the other things, kind of the note of like, if you don't have a Graham Ike, or even if you do have Graham Ike, like when we were talking about that potential matchup of him and Fuchs last week, and just how we know that Fuchs he's going to say some words, like he's emotional out there. He can get under your skin, and we know that has been a problem for Graham Ike in the past. And if those two start kind of jawing at each other, raise the physicality a bit, and maybe that's one of the things of like David Fuchs, unlike maybe some of the USF bigs of recent note, of like, this is like, he's got some beef to him. Like, he's not going to be shoved around underneath, maybe like some of the others could have been. Obviously, he doesn't necessarily have the height or whatnot I mean, they're not that dissimilar in height, Fuchs and Ike, but I think like the one thing I think about the matchup last year with St. Mary's, of like the one thing that gave Ike a problem was Harry Wessels, just because of how strong he was. So I think that if there's anything that might kind of even the scales, or at least get him closer to even, is the fact that Fuchs does play more physical. He is going to be a little bit more he's going to bang with him down low. And yes, you mentioned like on offense, like he will be able to go out to the perimeter, which is also what Ike likes to do from time to time. However, I do think no Braden Huff probably means that if he's in the lineup, he's going to stick closer to that basket a little bit more until Huff's able to get back on the floor.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way of characterizing what the Zag offense will be. And I think more than anything, I'm intrigued to see who gets the first defensive assignment on Ryan Beasley. I know I mentioned what Tyrone Riley can bring, but I think that's going to kind of be a combination of Tom Grant Foster and Jalen Worley. I don't feel like that should really be too much of a change along that front, just with the way the athleticism is and the length and anything that can present, because Tyrone Riley can be a matchup problem depending on what version of him you get on a game-to-game basis. But Ryan Beasley is the one that kind of intrigues me more than most. Does Braden Smith or Mario St. Perry, depending on what lineup Mark Feud rolls out, do they immediately get the jump on Ryan Beasley and kind of see what happens? I can see Beasley getting downhill, getting to some early floaters, early mid-range jumpers, and kind of, forcing Gonzaga to think about a switch or something like that. That's something that I just want to see in terms of a matchup proponent. And I think on the other side, I'm looking at a guy like Steele Venters in this type of game. I think that's someone where USF can play a good defense for like about 25 seconds of the shot clock, and then things go a little bit south when ball's in rotation, guys are scrambling, and then you just got to find the quick mismatch at the end. You're going to have the length on Riley. You're going to have the guards on Beasley. You're going to have Fuchs trying to deal with Ike, where Steele Venters kind of fit into that. And I think he can fly under the radar, especially when you think of just like a microwave-esque type of punch.
I mean, I always feel like the one thing that always kind of mismatches these two teams has always been the front court. Like, this is where like Gonzaga has had the clear advantage. And that's where it is really very much like, oh, the tipping point here feels like it's Graham Ike available or not available. Well, obviously, like Deani's gotten some minutes. Davis Vogel has played well the last few games. He's gotten more minutes. So we've seen the Gonzaga user depth a little bit more. Noah Holland also getting in heat, having 10 points himself against
as expected.
Exactly.
As expected.
So there's a lot. So they've been able to tap into their depth a little bit more, obviously more than they've wanted to because of the injuries. But before we get further, let's actually get Theo Lawson in, and we'll be able to talk a little bit more about what this matchup looks like. Theo, how's it going? And as you know, like we're thinking about this Dons Zags matchup, the last time the Dons will be probably playing up at the Kennel for maybe ever.
Yeah, I think so. I kind of don't imagine Mark Few scheduling a home and home with San Francisco anytime soon. And we were kind of joking about the Pepperdine matchup, and Gonzaga is obviously one win away from tying UCLA's NCAA record for wins against any team, and so Gonzaga needs one more. And so we were kind of joking maybe schedule a home and home against Pepperdine next season, get that done, and then get out of there against the Waves for good.
Hey,
so.
You get a buy game right there. It's just like bring them in. It's like you just sub them in instead of Western Oregon.
I just really want to go to Malibu one more time, honestly. So I'm kind of being selfish there. It was 16 degrees here in Spokane when I woke up this morning. So anything for some sunshine right now. But yeah. Obviously, the last matchup, actually San Francisco hasn't won in Spokane since 1989, which is one of the more incredible streaks, honestly, in Gonzaga history. Just considering all the good USF teams that we've had over the last decade, from Kyle Smith's teams to Todd Golden's team that went to the tournament, to a team with a second round draft pick and Jonathan Mobo. So just considering all the good quality USF teams that have come up here and lost, it's a pretty impressive run that they have against USF, and then one more chance obviously tonight.
So got to ask, any word on if Graham Ike is going to be playing tonight?
No word. Obviously, we all reported, wouldn't say he was wearing a boot against Pepperdine. Kind of interesting there, because he actually did sit out a game earlier this year against North Florida due to ankle soreness. That was more preventative. They had just played Kentucky and Nashville, and they were playing UCLA that next weekend. And I obviously felt like they could get by North Florida without Graham Ike, but he was not wearing a boot when he sat out for the North Florida game. So I don't know if that means this is more severe this time. And if that means that he won't play tonight, but obviously Mark Few said, he's kind of dealing with some discomfort, and once he can kind of get over the discomfort and feel good about playing, then we'll play him. Obviously this is a matchup where you want Graham Ike, but I think you want him more next Saturday against St. Mary's if you had a choice, and I think you probably feel a little bit better about getting by this USF team than getting by St. Mary's. So obviously you want to make sure he's completely healthy, and you obviously need him the rest of the year if you're not going to have Braden Huff.
Yeah, I think at least from an outsider's perspective, it feels like this Zag team is the best one since the Chet, Timmy, Andrew Nemhard team. When you look at kind of the ceiling of where this group can go, and provided the health of Braden Huff and Graham Ike changes that calculus a lot, how far along are the Zags in terms of trying to be that team that gets back to a Final Four and kind of reestablish themselves as that perennial powerhouse that maybe has escaped them the last few seasons?
Yeah, I think they feel pretty good about making another deep run of the tournament. I really think the difference with this team is they rebound and defend at a pretty high level, where they didn't really do either of those things at a high level last year. The scoring hasn't really dropped off much from past years, but they're just able to do things that they couldn't do with personnel the last couple of years, especially when you look at their perimeter defense and just kind of the different options they can throw out between Jalen Worley and Tyon Grant Foster, Emmanuel Innocenti, and obviously Davis Fogel's kind of progression the last week has been the next development, because you just weren't quite sure if he was going to be able to do that in close games. We'd seen that at the end of these blowout games where he comes in and scores 15 points in 12 minutes, but it's really translating to kind of first half tight game scenarios. So that's another nice development. But I think it all does come down to the health of those two big guys as far as making a Final Four run. If both are available, I think they have as good of a chance as anyone to make it to the final weekend. If you're just playing with Ike for most of the rest of the year, obviously that equation changes. But still, I think at the very least, this is a team that should be setting its sights on the second weekend. And then once you get there, you're just not going to play too many teams that have that level of front court depth and talent. So I think they can kind of overwhelm most teams until you get to a Michigan or an Arizona or kind of a team of that stature. And ideally, if you're playing for a 1 or 2 seed right now, and Gonzaga seems to be in that 2 seed lane right now, you won't have to play a team like that probably until the Final Four, ideally.
Totally fair. And I think part of the deal is there's so many good glue guys, like kind of, so to speak, holding it together. Jalen Worley sticks out, given what he's been able to do. You mentioned on defense, I think Braden Smith has also he's done enough, considering what Mario St. Perry has been doing. How do you kind of view the value of what Braden Smith and Jalen Worley had in terms of that those like red shirt / sideline years of kind of learning what it takes to be as a part of the program and kind of the standard to uphold. How have you seen the value of that kind of take shape in their actual play this season?
Yeah, I think it's extremely valuable, especially for Smith, because he was there a lot earlier than Worley. Worley obviously came mid-season, didn't I think arrive until like January for the second semester. But both of those guys just kind of being willing to do that. First of all, obviously Braden Smith could have transferred to a number of high majors and probably been the starting point guard right away on teams that weren't competing for the second weekend or the third weekend of the tournament. Jalen Worley kind of had to do this after his situation in Virginia and kind of had no choice, so he just found the best fit. And obviously Gonzaga is known for that redshirt program. If you go all the way back to Kelly Olynyk and Brandon Clark was kind of a forced redshirt year, but Nigel Williams-Goss too went through that redshirt year. So I can't really think of a scenario where it didn't really work out for a redshirt player at Gonzaga. They kind of have the saying here that every dog has their day, and so if you just kind of wait your time, you're going to get your opportunity. And kind of sounds like coach speak, but it's obviously worked out for Gonzaga, and Worley especially has been kind of their most, I think, valuable player with the two big guys out. Even going back to Thursday against WC when Ike was still playing, he just does so much. He's really playing all 5 positions. He's taking the ball up the floor. Even when Braden Smith is on the floor, he's still kind of playing that point guard spot a little bit. Last Saturday against Seattle U, he was guarding Austin Moore. And so he's guarding 1 through 5. He's taking the ball up. He's kind of doing whatever you need. He's doing basically everything but shoot 3-pointers. He hasn't shot a 3 all season, which is kind of one of the more unique stats for a 6'7" wing in this day and age of college basketball. But he's really been valuable. Braden Smith has been pretty steady, although I think Mario has actually kind of overtaken him as far as play and production lately.
I mean, it was kind of like just thinking about when Braden Huff went out, and my first thought was like, actually, this team's going to get better defensively without him on the floor. And I mean, the last few games, obviously, the level of opponent has been obviously as great, or we're not talking even USF level, Santa Clara, whatnot, but opponent field goal percentage 40%, 35%, 37%. Yeah, they've had to play a little bit smaller over the last few games, but it feels like it's giving the Zags a little bit of time to play in a different way, because they might need to kind of mix and match when they get to March as far as like the style in which they play. And defensively, we've seen like they are just so locked in with this group, and they're so versatile. And I think like, do you think there's any level of like value in the fact that now having to play without Braden Huff, obviously like you don't want to have to do it long term, but this in spurts or whatnot, once you get to March, like this, the fact that you're practicing this more and more is going to end up being a benefit.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned going small. I go back to that Seattle U game in the second half when they roll out that small ball lineup with Worley at the 5, and he's guarding Moore, and he's really not protecting their rim per se, but they're trying to take advantage of that matchup, and he's not letting it happen. And then Brian Michelson, their assistant coach, made the point to me that Seattle U actually had to switch their scheme to kind of match what Gonzaga was doing. So Seattle U goes small, and then Gonzaga really has the advantage with their small ball lineup against Seattle U. So they're kind of changing what other teams are doing based on that small ball lineup. And like you mentioned, it does allow them to defend better. Braden Huff is not a top 10 rim protector in the country. Graham Ike is better than Huff, but he's not a top 10 rim protector in the country. And so both of those guys tend to get in foul trouble as well. So actually, in kind of a funny way, when you have Diane at the 5, it's almost their best defensive lineup, because he is so tall and long, and he's gotten better at not fouling underneath the hoop. So they're playing differently. They can kind of switch 1 through 5 when they're playing that small lineup. You have 4 or 5 different guys who can bring the ball up the floor, a little bit more perimeter shooting. So it's not the best lineup that they can put out there, because they don't have the 2 best players in that lineup. But I don't think that they get significantly worse, if worse at all, with that lineup, just because even if they're not scoring at the same rate, they're probably defending better. They're playing in transition a lot better without Huff and Ike on the floor. That's one thing that's been pretty apparent. And I think other guys are also kind of excited to get their chances. They're more than willing to play through the post players, but you have 5th year, 6th year, 7th year guys like Miller and Tyler Grant Foster and Jalen Worley who know this is kind of their last opportunity to play college basketball, unless we have more waiver drama in the offseason, of course. That's a joke. But I think they're kind of taking advantage of it, and they get more shots and more opportunities. So it's kind of a win for a lot of people in this scenario, and it's kind of more about finding the silver lining because obviously, hopefully, you have those two guys back sooner than later. But they're certainly making it work, and now that you know how to play the small ball lineup, if you have to play it against a certain opponent in March, you have at least 4 to 5 games of a sample size.
And naturally, as we all expected, Noah Holland dropping double-digit points. Just as we all predicted at the start of the season, like no one's business. We would do one more like long-term question before we get into kind of what USF brings to the table. And we got fan question or viewer questions here. Historically, it takes great guard play to advance the NCAA tournament, and we know, is that technically a weak point for the team, or kind of how do you view like what are some of going to be the potential drawbacks if the Zags are to run into roadblocks on going on a March Madness run?
Yeah, I think maybe relative to a team that they're playing. I mean, if they're playing, like say Alabama, they played Alabama in Vegas. They can't match up with LeBaron Philon and Aiden Holloway from the guard spot. But there's not really too many teams that have the post advantage and the guard advantage over Gonzaga. So I think if you're playing a smaller team like in Alabama, you saw Gonzaga play through the post pretty heavily and have an advantage there. Now, if you're playing Arizona or Michigan, which again I don't think you probably play until really late in the tournament. Yeah, you might have to overcome some things and have a really good shooting night. But I think it does take great guard play. I think Mario St. Super, he really is emerging. He did battle with a pretty bad flu before the Oregon game. That really sidelined him. And they said he probably shouldn't have even played in that Oregon game. And then that obviously sent him to the bench. They elevated Braden Smith. And so I think Mario really just has taken a little bit more time than they expected to kind of get back to full health. But he is someone who I could see being as good as not any guard in the tournament per se, but I think he's a lot better than people realize. He's getting better. He's getting more comfortable. He's another player who's taking advantage of more shots. He's a really good catch and shoot three-point shooter. He's kind of converting in the mid range. Also, without the two bigs, he has more lanes to the basket. So it's kind of created more space for him to go downhill and attack, which he's big. He's quick. He's got good finishing ability at the rim too. So I think he's been really solid, and I don't think their guard play is as bad as people may make it out to be per se. I think that's going to only kind of develop as those guards get more opportunities. But obviously the strength is the post play, and if you have a tandem like that, then why not play through them?
Yeah, he's shown the flash for sure, and in certain respects can be the straw that stirs the drink at times. As a freshman, we've seen everybody's got their own level of variance and roller coaster ride, but Mario, I think, is more than turned the corner. One thing on USF that Zach and I were talking about before you hopped in is kind of how they attempt to corral David Fuchs, and kind of because he plays a little bit more perimeter oriented at times, likes to finally kind of get his guards open via the pass a lot from the perimeter and the top of the key. And is it as simple as just sticking Jalen Morley on him if Graham Ike doesn't go, or kind of how do you view that? Because it's not like Seattle where it's a lot of back to the basket play with the big men. It's someone where Fuchs can he'll go out, he'll even take the open 3-pointer if you give it to him. How do you view that kind of matchup? Is it just as simple as Jalen Morley?
Yeah, I think so. I think if Ike doesn't play, I think they go back to that same lineup that they've had the last two games with Diane in at the 5. But if things aren't working well at the first media timeout, they've been pretty quick to take Diane out and plug Worley in. Maybe see some more Noah Holland. We'll see. But I think you trust Worley against Fuchs because I think Fuchs is 6'9", so he's not your traditional 6'10", 6'11", 7-footer. I don't know how I'd feel about Worley guarding Andrew McKeever or Harry Wessels, but we'll get to that next week if we have to. I think Ike will probably be back for that game. But I think you trust Worley against Fuchs. Like I mentioned, he held it pretty well against Austin Maurer from Seattle U, and that's a 7-footer who likes to play more back to the basket. So if Worley has to guard Fuchs down low, I think he can do that. If he has to go out to the perimeter, obviously that's more of an advantage for Jalen Worley. He creates a lot of chaos out there. He's really handsy, has great instincts. He had I think 3 steals in the first 3 minutes against WSU last Thursday. So he's really good out there, and I think they just have the ability to guard this USF team. I feel way better about this matchup than I did Saturday against Seattle U defensively, and then obviously they held up pretty well against Seattle U too. So,
I mean, one of the things I'll note is that talking about the matchup with Fuchs, second in the conference in free throw attempts, so it gets to the line a lot. So even if actually Ike were to be playing, there is that danger of Ike potentially getting into foul trouble, and that obviously like slows that game down. And I know he's not a terribly good free throw shooter, but at the very least, he can make the Zags have to go deeper and deeper onto that bench quickly.
Yeah, I think Worley does a pretty good job of guarding without fouling. Ike is a different story there. I think if Ike plays too, I think you just have to worry a little bit about the minutes and kind of keeping his minutes down. I was almost thinking of a scenario where you make him available for this game and start him on the bench, and if you need him to come off the bench, if things aren't looking so good, then he can play. But maybe just kind of ride it out without him for at least the first half. And if you have a lead, then keep him on the bench and don't use him until you have to. So we'll kind of see how it goes there. But I think this Gonzaga team has done a fairly good job of guarding without fouling. Like I mentioned, Diane was not great in that regard last year. Maybe aside from that Santa Clara game where he had to be great down there and at Santa Clara. But the first half against Seattle U didn't commit a single foul, and then actually committed 3 or 4 in kind of like a 2-3 minute span. So kind of backfired in the second half, but did a fairly good job the first half. Has gotten more disciplined without guarding without fouling. So I think that'll be a key for sure. And I think if you can guard Fuchs with one guy, that's an advantage, because you certainly don't want to leave any of USF's shooters open, especially Ryan Beasley right now.
And as we kind of get you out of here, what thinking about the last trips, the last go around, a lot of these WCC cities. I mean, you already mentioned selfishly wanting the Malibu trip still there. Is there a WCC trip that you're going to miss now that it's no longer on the schedule? Obviously, you've got to take San Diego out because you still get San Diego on the calendar.
Yeah, I think the obvious trip is St. Mary's. That's hopefully a game that we get down the road, and I hope they don't go to a neutral scenario, just because I'm not really interested in seeing that game at the Chase Center, at Spokane Arena, or at Climate Pledge. I need to see it at the Kennel and down in Moraga too. So selfishly for me, obviously being a Bay Area native, I like the trips back to the Bay Area for personal reasons, but also there just aren't many better rivalries in the country than Gonzaga St. Mary's. So one more chance to do that. I think it's only kind of fitting that it's the last game of the regular season. Who knows where those teams will be by then? But I just have to imagine it'll be a game, for the regular season title. It just kind of seems like it would end that way after this many years and being the last game of the regular season. So that's always a great atmosphere. So certainly miss that atmosphere, and I'm gonna look forward to hopefully getting down there for another road game. I could see that being the one team that Gonzaga wants to schedule again. But obviously we get three games down there in the Bay Area to kind of close the year. Playing at Chase Center isn't quite the same as War Memorial. I kind of wish that game would always go back to War Memorial, but I understand the reasons it hasn't. So I probably picked those 3 along with the warm weather SoCal locales like Malibu and LA and San Diego.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Theo, for hopping on. We'll definitely catch up down the road, and I will probably see you next week, as I am actually now officially making the trip to Spokane for the game next week. So I will need to catch up when I get up there, and we'll grab a beer somewhere.
Yep. Sounds good. Hopefully the weather gets up to at least the 30s when you're here. So warm weather for you.
We'll try to bring the warm weather with us. Weather with us.
All right. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thanks. All right. Thanks a lot for Theo Lawson for hopping on, talking that matchup, because I think it's going to be, I don't think that the Zags, are going to completely run away with this one. Not that I think that that USF is going to win this game. I think it would be a massive, massive upset if they were to go on to the Kennel and get a win here. But if there's no Graham Ike, I think the playing field gets very much leveled in this matchup. I think you mentioned it's like the spread is still 17.5. So there might be the assumption that that Ike will be playing in this game. So we'll just have to kind of wait and see that game later on tonight. Any final thought on that game before we move on to the rest of the slate?
I think it feels like one of those, it kind of feels like where it'll go like the Santa Clara game, where it kind of feels like every USF Gonzaga game for the last 3 or so years of USF does a great first 20 minutes, might even have a halftime lead heading into the break, and then things get testy in the first couple minutes, and then probably with about 10 minutes or so to go, things start to go in the wrong direction, and usually USF just can't muster enough to not they don't get blown out, so to speak, but they'll lose by like 8 to 12 points and just don't have enough firepower to get over the top. I can envision a similar game, especially without Graham Ike. I think maybe on a little bit more of a closer margin, so to speak, but it's a game where I think it can get testy at times. It's something where it's like you're not raising an eyebrow at the Zags or anything like that, but you're like, you'd like to. I think USF will stick around longer than people want and are hoping / anticipating from a Zag perspective. I do think Gonzaga can win this game by like 10 to 15 points.
All right. Well, we're going to move on to what we saw. We're going to move on to Washington State because we saw a couple of different things this week. One, we saw them down at San Diego and allowing the Toreros to put up 96 on them, which is the most that San Diego has scored against a D1 team since 2007. The Cougs have allowed their last 4 opponents to score at least 85 points. We talked a few weeks ago just about how it started to look like they were getting right, and now it looks like we have kind of regressed back to what we saw in the preseason. Ace Glass is still having a great season. He had 29 in that game against San Diego, but the defense has kind of left this team, and they're in a rough go right now. Now they do have a pretty good opportunity to get right. They have Pepperdine coming into the Palouse this afternoon, and so that obviously that's that opportunity for them to pick up another win. But at the same time, like they are playing zero defense right now, and even David Riley said the other night it was probably like the worst they've played all year.
Yeah, he called it. I'm pretty sure he called it embarrassing on the post-game radio show down in San Diego. And yeah, I think the thing is in certain respects, when you play so well against St. Mary's, and they didn't play that great against Gonzaga, to be honest, it just magnifies those games when you do put so much into it, kind of like the matchup down in Moraga. And then you have to turn around and go play USF. You got to turn around and go play San Diego. Those matchups become a lot more amplified because it's kind of like the Seattle U dilemma. You do so well, but you don't get the win against the big dogs. How much do you have left in the tank, or how much do you have schematically and in the game plan to reach back into the well and put something together? And Washington State, they didn't play nearly enough defense against USF to win the game. And then, mixed that with no offense in the last 2.5 minutes. And you mentioned all the statures of bad defense against San Diego. I mean, the Toreros, I think, were up by as many as 18 in the first half, if I'm not mistaken. And it just can't happen. It really can't. And I'm seeing lots of, Cougar fans online. They're getting pretty sick of it. And I don't know that I can necessarily blame them from the level of defense, because we talked about how maybe the offense wouldn't be enough at the start of the season and that the defense may have to lead the way. And then it looked like that for quite some time. Now it looks like it's reversing course back the other way, and that the offense is starting to pick up, and now the defense is falling off a cliff. And I guess maybe we didn't put enough stock into the presence of Tomas Thrasterson and kind of what he would bring. I think he's a solid connector for the defense. I'm not sure he fixes every single problem, so to speak, but that's kind of how I view that in terms of the Cougs not necessarily having all their personnel. But in the same vein, like, you have to, San Diego is not a team that should be blowing the brakes off you. That's not to say that it's automatic pencil in a win when you show up to Jenny Craig Pavilion or anything like that. But there's no reason why they should be tearing you apart and making you look as bad as they did on a consistent basis for 40 minutes. So that was the part that stood out to me the most.
I mean, one of the things is just looking at the numbers is their 3-point defense. It just has not been there. Last couple nights. San Diego shot 53% from three. USF shot 54% from three. Gonzaga was at 37%, but they didn't take as many. And then St. Mary's shot 46% from three. The last 4 games, they have just not defended the perimeter well. And that is something that's going to luckily probably even itself out, because Pepperdine's not a good 3-point shooting team. So that should kind of help their cause. But that something's got to change defensively, because a lot of defensively, that's a lot of times we just talk about like it's effort. It's less so about scheme and whatnot. And this Washington State team is just like they're doing enough offensively, it feels like, to be able to win some of these games. They're just not doing it on the defensive end.
Yeah, no, they're not. And it goes without saying that it needs to change, but I look at kind of the turnaround. Pepperdine already up there after losing to Gonzaga. Washington State, kind of a tight turnaround going from San Diego flying back up to Pepperdine. I don't know if that's going to play any role in kind of the way things are going. And if I remember correctly from last year, Pepperdine was beating Washington State down the stretch quite a, had at arm's length. And I think Washington State had to have some late magic to go back and win one. So it's not like that's been an easy task for the Cougs, dating back to last season as well. So that's kind of how I view that. I think it's one of those ones where you watch from a distance as to who can save their season, more or less. And if you want to talk about segue wise of things needing to change and quickly, LMU, I mean, they got eviscerated for the most part against Seattle U. They were down 50-24, I think, at one point. And I mean, you mentioned how bad the Lions have been outside of Gersten. I think they're there you go. You got the lower third right up there. They're 1-6 in their last 7 games, and the one game they did win was that USF game where they were down 4, I think, 14 seconds, and then
where we could say they probably shouldn't have won.
Yeah, and USF literally throws it away underneath their own basket. So it just, I don't know. There just doesn't seem to be much of a remedy for what LMU doesn't bring on a consistent basis. At least for me, it's their intensity and force. That's kind of what sticks out above all, and that's kind of the pillar of what Stan Johnson wants to do with his teams: defense, rebounding, physical presence. And half the games you don't see it. They got boat raced at Santa Clara. I know the final score looks a lot better than it did against Seattle U, but Seattle U was on them quite a lot of this game. And it's just, I don't know, man. I wasn't high on LMU, and then I thought I was going to be wrong given what I had saw for the most part non-conference play, and they just have not put it together whatsoever, and it's very concerning.
Just look again across the board. The one biggest concern we had about LMU going into the year was whether or not the offense was going to be consistent enough. And in WCC play, it just hasn't been. They're shooting 41% as a team, 33% from 3. They're -10 they're -7 on the boards. They are kind of minus across the board. And of course, that makes sense for a team that is 2-6 in league or 2-7 in league play. We're at the halfway point for LMU, and it seems like that we're already back to very quickly got to disappointing territory for what LMU is capable of versus what we are seeing the results be on the floor. Because the last few games, they have been playing from behind from the get-go, whether that be Seattle U, whether that be Portland. They are trying to play catch-up in so many of these games. They're making it harder and harder on themselves to be able to win some of these contests. And we could very easily be looking at them as being 1-8, not 2-7 in league play, which seems wild to think about when we think about what LMU was looking like toward the end of the non-conference, what they looked like at the beginning of conference play. It was there was a reason for hope, there was a reason for optimism, and that has completely faded away.
Yeah, and I think it's crazy. You're getting to the point where am I going to be seeing LMU on day one with 9, 12, 10, 11 games going? That's as much as I put that in the power rankings at the start of the season. It's one thing to say that, and it's another thing to actually see it happen in front of you. And I'm having a hard time coming to terms with the fact that LMU is sliding back when they should be trying to ascend forward. And I think you're getting to rubber meets the road territory when you look at the grand scheme of the program, because they have not gotten to that graduated next tier of even being where Santa Clara, San Francisco have been. They haven't necessarily threatened that either. I mean, they've beaten them, but they haven't necessarily threatened them in the grand scheme of things. And this bye coming up today comes at a good time for them. But it's a 5-alarm fire, at least for me. It's just things have not changed for the better. It's just not in terms of we are who they thought they were, but it's you've had so many chances to say, yep, we're not this anymore. We're better. We're going to get it done. And I know you've been very adamant of how critical Jan Vide is to their success and how things have kind of turned along that front. So it's just they keep having these opportunities to show us that this is different, and they don't do it.
Yeah. I mean, I was pulling up the number of, because Jan Vide was 6-7 assists a game in the non-conference. He was looking really good, and through league play, he's at 2.9 a game, and that is a significant swing in the other direction. Obviously, like your assists, you're completely dependent upon your guys making shots and everything else, putting them in good positions. But that's a massive drop off from non-con to WCC play.
Yeah, and then one quick thing is just it's one of the first questions we've gotten in regards to what the offseason can be is Stan on the hot seat, and I'll be very brief on this because I don't personally like to be so flamboyant with these types of answers, so to speak. But I will say this: I think it hinges on the end of the season. Like if LMU can ride it out and find a way to get back into the mid tier of the mid standings or something like that, and scrap together 7th place or something like that, I think Stan Johnson gets to next year, and then that's make or break. But if this thing falls off the tracks, then we got some. I think there are going to be some heavy discussions down in Los Angeles.
Yeah, I also don't like to necessarily comment on like those sorts of situations, but at the same time,
it is a fair question to ask.
It is a fair question because I think one of the challenges that this team has faced is that over the years, through Stan Johnson's tenure, is that we've seen like, the excuse has always been like they were banged up, they were injured. Like the years that they had that were down, they really didn't have any of their key guys available. But after a while, that could no longer be an excuse. Like you had to kind of throw that out the window. At a certain point, you have to win. At a certain point, you have to have the results, regardless of what's happening on that front, because that you're still recruiting the players who are coming in and getting hurt. It's like that's still part of your responsibility to make sure that they're being put in a good situation. And I mean, even Stan Johnson we've talked about that in interviews about that. It feels like that's kind of like it's put up or shut up time, and they have to be able to kind of salvage the season, salvage the end here. Yeah, they kind of had a rough go of it early on, but if they can kind of flip it back over and start to play a little bit well toward the end, I think that maybe he holds on. Also, there might be something to be said about going into what would be a new look WCC next year. No Gonzaga, no Washington State, no Oregon State. Denver comes in. There's greater opportunity. But at the same time, maybe LMU leadership is going to say we need a fresh start as we enter a new era of the West Coast Conference.
Yeah, that could definitely be the case when you think about the experience he added to the bench recently with putting in Lorenzo Romar, and you think of known as a very good recruiter and very personable and trying to get talent in the building. It feels like LMU is more talented than years past. I think Rodney Brown's very capable. I think MJ Amy is very more than capable. You'd like Jan Vide. It's just
Jalen Shelley.
Yeah, Jalen Shelley. It's just for whatever one reason or other, it just hasn't clicked. And I'm not going to act like I can prescribe the medicine that fixes LMU or anything like that. But just based on what I'm seeing and what we have been seeing, it's kind of like Washington State. It's rubber meets the road territory right now, and you got to figure out what version of the Lions kind of shows up to either save the season or kind of falls off the map. But when thinking about LMU and the team that actually just beat them, Seattle U, they're now on the road. As another segue, they're over into Stockton in the Central Valley in the battle of trying to get themselves out of the bar fight that is the middle of the WCC standings. This to me is going to be I can see this game going down the stretch and potentially going into overtime. Like I'm Pacific has done solid. I think all things considered, they've done solid. And Seattle
Pacific they have defended their home court very well.
They've done solid as a whole, and I think Seattle U, they're starting to recollect themselves after kind of the getting stunned against Gonzaga, getting walloped by St. Mary's, and yes, they got walloped by Gonzaga again. But I think they're starting to dust themselves off just a little bit. I think, at least from my perspective. But when I look at this matchup, Zach, I think it's one where who wins the battle of the guards? Is it Braden Maldonado? Is it Elias Ralph? Is it Malik Arrington, or is it TJ Wainwright? And that's, to me, that's where the matchup starts, continues, and finishes.
I'm kind of curious about this matchup actually between Isaac Jack and the just kind of the Seattle front line, because so a lot of what but Pacific success has kind of leaned on is one way or the other is how active Isaac Jack has been. Now, again, because I think this game is going to be close. I think this is going to be a tough matchup, and Pacific, I think, has started to play much better. I mean, they got a road win at Oregon State. They won by 17. So they're coming off a really good win, coming back home where they are 8-0. They have defended the Spanos Center well. And I think it's really kind of like controlling the glass, like who can control the glass a little bit better. Seattle U really has not done that all too well in WCC play. Pacific, I think, is kind of well suited to be able to control the boards in this matchup. And if they can get some of those second chance opportunities and really kind of keep Seattle limited on the offensive end, I think Pacific is going to be able to hold court and continue on with that undefeated streak in Stockton.
Yeah, I think, at least for me, given that the slate of games isn't so, I guess, flashy, so to speak, other than Gonzaga, San Francisco, I think this is a game that flies under the radar in the sense of, if you weren't planning on watching it and you got some free time, I would throw this game on. I think it's something where you're gonna find out a whole lot of, it's not rubber meets the road, but it's more fork in the road territory, because one team gets to escape the fire that is everybody else dragging each other down, and the other one's like, oh boy, like we got to hold on for dear life and try and find a way to recover ourselves in the remaining back half of WCC games. So I like the fact that you mentioned Isaac Jack, because he's been kind of I would say the tipping point, so to speak, when it comes to Pacific, because you know what Elias Ralph was going to bring to the table, and Isaac Jack, we remember the start of the season where he was like leading the nation in like a field goal percentage for like X amount of weeks or something like that. So yeah, I mean, now that you want to see him up his volume, you want to feel more of his impact. And the question for the Tigers has been, who else is going to join the party besides Elias Ralph and TJ Wainwright? So I do look at Isaac Jack, and I value that perspective. And the last two games of the day, St. Mary's at Portland, Santa Clara at San Diego. I think both teams, the theme is take care of your business. San Diego has been on a bit of a hot streak, especially at home as of late in the Slim Jim. And yeah, I mean, that's the question. That's the real. If you saw social media on the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast, it is not. Don't even think about San Francisco if you're Santa Clara. It is not. It has not been about the wins against St. Mary's. It has been about the blown tires on the road, at home. It does not. It just. I remember them over the years at Portland, at home to San Diego, at home against Pacific in years gone by. So Santa Clara, just get out of there. Just get out of there with a win. That I don't even think we need to. At least for me, I don't do so much of the matchup. I know Hassan Diop just had a triple-double against Bethesda, so credit to him for doing that recently in that non-conference slate. Come on, we didn't give him due credit. You got to accomplish it, and he did do that. So that's kind of where I view it. Santa Clara, just make out like bandits. If you get a 1-point win, okay, cool, get on the plane and leave.
I mean, yeah, with that matchup, it's really, you have to handle your business just to get the hell out of town, because that is one that can be a trap. San Diego's going to be riding on a high right now. Like, again, like beating Washington State at home the way they did, scoring 96. They have shown that if you don't pay attention, they will catch you. Like, they will sneak up on you and be able to get out a win. Again, like, you think of it, like they've beaten UC San Diego. Like they're capable of beating most anyone. And Santa Clara is still in that window, still in that stage of having to avoid those losses. And if they can get over the hump, again, it's always like, can Buki Boye stay out of foul trouble? Can Alan Graves have another good game? Are we going to get another good performance from Christian Hammond? He had a really good week last week. Obviously, he was player of the week, but we've seen him have some ups and downs and as well. So if Santa Clara can handle their business, play the defense that we saw them play against St. Mary's, they're going to have no problem in San Diego, but they have to make sure that it travels with them down the coast.
Yeah, mental intensity is the thing I'm looking at more than anything. And they flattened USD once already. I think that was, yes, Tyler Johnson was kind of in and out of that game, but still, I think that's for me what kind of sticks out. How much does Santa Clara if anything, how much does that St. Mary's win fuel them as opposed to, okay, we've had a week off? Is it now more of a trap game at San Diego and kind of dissuading that? So I think everybody that's in the Santa Clara, like, I guess, the sector, they kind of know, they know what this upcoming game is. Like, more than anything, it's the one where they have to avoid the bump of the road. It's not, you can't look at USF this upcoming Wednesday and say, yep, well, I want to get that rivalry game. We got to get that on the road. No, the answer is to Torero's first, Torero's only. And they got to go 1-0 each and every day. So it's them. St. Mary's up in Portland. They got to take care of their business. I expect them to. I think the size is just going to overwhelm Portland, kind of just like it did down in Moraga when they played early on in the WCC slate. And again, I'm going to keep looking at Mikey Lewis as the guy of like, okay, what are you going to give me?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and then, because again, like, I think one of the keys there is like, it's Joel Foxwell, because St. Mary's did a really good job of just eliminating him from the equation. And Portland really kind of like their success kind of does really hinge on how well Foxwell can play in a game. And St. Mary's did a very good job of making his life a living hell the last time around. And so that they're going to try to do that again. So I'd expect him to have a little bit of a better game this time around, because I'd expect that Foxwell is going to make some adjustments. Coaching staff will make some adjustments, but at the same time, I think the size of St. Mary's is going to probably overwhelm Portland the longer that game goes along.
Yeah. So I think going forward, St. Mary's, I think that they're on the right track again. I think more or less we're not that. I know you want to look ahead very much to that game in Spokane.
No looking ahead.
What? No looking. You've learned from other teams to not do that. But I think St. Mary's is well on their way to having things going on, and I think they'll get things done against Portland. I will acknowledge that we do see this about UCSD and Denver, but I think more than anything, we're gonna do a little bit more research on that and then get you some more, I guess, serious is not the right word, but more secure answers. That way we can make sure we've done our due diligence in unpacking everything that comes from the new members going in. Because it is, at the end of the day, we are in the midst of this current WCC season, so we haven't taken a huge look at that, but we'll make sure to get some more secure answers down the road, even if it's not in the next very direct next episode.
All right. Well, we're going to get out of here. Thanks a lot, everybody, for watching. Be sure to hit the subscribe button on YouTube, Spotify, wherever you are listening. Follow us on social media at unofficial WCC pod. Want to thank Theo Lawson one more time for hopping on the pod and joining us to preview Zags and Dons. That's Thomas. I'm Zach. Thanks for watching, everybody, and we will catch you later.